Go ahead, man. Let's
Alrighty.
let's do this.
Alrighty. Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just checking to make sure that I'm all figured out here.
Go ahead, man.
Yes, there's Simon's voice. Okay, how's it going, everybody? And now we're recording on my computer. My name is Dustin Cormier, and it's a pleasure to be hanging out with everybody here live on another live stream. I'm How to Rock Astrology. And today I'm very, very excited to have my friend Simon Vorster from Raising Vibrations hanging out with me to talk about Pluto's South and North Node. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today, Simon.
Yeah, looking forward to this conversation, man. Very much.
Me as well, my friend. I had Simon on here. I think it must have been about a year or two ago. I can't even
Yeah,
think of it now.
it was 2021. So,
Yes, that would have been 2 years ago. So
uh-huh.
time's flying. And every time Simon and I get together, we have a lot of fun. We both got a lot of planets in Sagittarius that we often mention.
Yeah,
And so we both love to fly by the seat of our pants on a subject that is wisdom oriented. It's very Sagittarius, as I find. It's spontaneous, but the spontaneity is on the steel rail of Jupiterian wisdom, which I
right.
often say about Jupiter, it's the self in one, which is the self in all.
That's right.
So now, Simon, we're going to go through a few things today. The main conversation that we're having is going to be on the subject of Pluto's North and South Node. Now, I believe that you just mentioned that today or tomorrow is Pluto's birthday. Do you want to mention what you would just discuss with me on that regard?
Sure, yeah. On the 18th of February 1930, Pluto's discovery had occurred. So it's interesting that we'd be having a conversation about the nature of Pluto. It was actually discovered on its north node. So
Mm.
not only, Pluto being this planet that has given humanity a tremendous amount of understanding about itself through the various things that have happened, many of them not so nice. It's interesting to have it discovered on its north node, and for us to have this conversation where the next day literally is the 18th of February. So there's a little bit of an interesting synchronicity there,
Mm.
right? The
And
ode to Pluto.
love it. And it's interesting that Pluto right now is dancing around Capricorn, which would
Mhm.
be Pluto's south node.
That's right. Yeah.
Uh, so you mentioned that when it was discovered, it would have been in Cancer then, which
Yeah,
would have been where its north node was.
that's right.
Uh, so there's lots for us to talk about here, Simon. One of the things that we're going to end up covering, I'm sure, is what happens when Pluto goes through Cancer and Capricorn, those
Mhm.
being where its nodes are.
Yeah.
There's lots to talk about in terms of the collective as well as in individual natal charts.
Yes.
Now, before we start scratching into things, the first thing I'd like to ask you, Simon, so you are one of the you've been on YouTube for quite a long time
Mhm.
discussing evolutionary astrology. And I would say one of the reasons I'm so interested in this topic is because of you being on
Nice.
YouTube for as long as you have been. And I appreciate the work you've done, and I'm sure my audience would agree with me in saying that. So I wanted to ask you, as you are an evolutionary astrologer, now you, of course, follow the work of Jeffrey Wolf Green. Would
Yeah,
you
that's
say
right.
that's correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And you've got a few things on your channel talking about the different ideas of evolutionary astrology. Did you ever complete his DVD course? I did want to ask you that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I completed the DVD course. I was actually looking at it today. It's
Cool.
in a part of the house that you can see it every day. So
Cool. So you've got it there. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
There's a lot of work there. And he's quite an interesting chap, to say
yeah,
the very least about him.
that is true.
So Jeffrey Wolf Green's one of his great additions to the world of astrology has been his contributions to the conversation about Pluto.
Yeah.
As well, he also talks an awful lot about the nodes as well.
Yes.
In particular, most people know about the nodes of the moon. In Vedic astrology, we talk a lot about Rahu and Ketu.
Yeah.
And I am of the understanding that the work that's been done on the moon's nodes is going to really help you and I project into what we can expect from the effects of Pluto's nodes on the collective as well as in an individual chart.
Yeah, I would say that that's true. Yeah.
I mean, of course, the moon is different from Pluto, and so we have to consider that.
Yeah.
Now, to dive into this a little bit, for everybody watching, we have the nodes of all, there are nodes of all the planets. The moon is a very interesting one. The moon is the only one that goes backwards. When we see Rahu and Ketu, when we see the North and South node, they aren't actual physical planets. They are mathematical points created by the dance between the Earth, the moon, and the sun. The moon's path as the Earth is going along the ecliptic. So because the moon is going around the Earth, that's part of the reason why the moon is going backwards. The moon's nodes, rather, are going backwards and through the zodiac. As for all of the other planets, all of the planets have nodes, and they have this same mathematical relationship. And what's interesting about them is that because Pluto, for example, is revolving around the sun, Pluto's nodes go forward. And sometimes the outer planet nodes aren't even an exact axis. For example, there's times where Pluto's south node will be at 20 degrees Capricorn and the north node will be at like 22 degrees Cancer. They kind of go a bit wonky in this way. Now, the first thing I'd like to ask you, Simon, is, Jeffrey Wolf Green had so much work to do in carving out his particular evolutionary astrology at all the foundations. And someone who works on the foundations of something would have a hard time getting into the juiciest fruit available to his own system, because he spent a lot of time just scratching out the basics for people. So I would like to ask you, did he talk a lot in your experience of what you learned from his DVD courses and anything you've picked up from Jeffrey Wolf Green? Did he mention Pluto's south nodes and the north node of Pluto a lot in his lectures and in his work?
Yeah, he did. I'm pretty sure that there's a free lecture online where Jeff talks about the planetary nodes of,
right.
Yeah.
I have seen that one.
Yeah. And he did talk a little bit about it in the school. It didn't take up a lot of space, but he did mention it. I think he also recognized that, like you said, bringing that forward to the collective at that time probably would have been a lot more intense to deal with than the content he was already bringing forth, which was intense by nature. So, but yeah, he did. He advocated for it.
He probably would have wanted to talk about it more, but he, again, spent probably a lot of his time scratching out those fundamentals.
Yep, that's right.
So we do know that the Pluto's nodes are emphasized in evolutionary astrology. Is this something that you have found yourself? Do you take this as an interest in observing the evolution of the collective? Or have you done a lot of work digging into how this might affect someone's natal chart?
Sure.
Would you be able to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, so my experience in journeying with this is I became familiar with the planetary nodes fairly early on in my experience of EA. So it was something that I think already in 2014 I was beginning to understand and be interested in. It is It is a very fascinating subject. I think the planetary nodes are one of my favorite conversations to actually have, to be honest. So there are, I've played with it a lot. And the conclusion that I've come to so far in my sort of process of my evolving thoughts and relationship to it is that there's two roads that you can take, right? You can look at it in the context of what it looks like in somebody's natal chart. And you can say, okay, well, this is a series of experiences, but that is it's a very difficult thing to convey to somebody. Right? To really grasp the essence of the planetary node itself, especially Pluto in somebody's life, can be very difficult and overwhelming. So what I've noticed that has been beneficial is if there is a desire and interest to really go into understanding what the planetary node of Pluto in Capricorn means, okay, then you'd be able to have some impact, some benefit. Like there would be a conversation where somebody could go deep within themselves to understand the conditioning of this archetype. That being said, there is tremendous amount of value in it, especially if people have actually got planets in Capricorn that are on the planetary nodes of Pluto. Because whenever you've got planets on the planetary node of Pluto, whether it be the North Node or the South Node, you will find yourself living Pluto planetary node themes that oftentimes can be pretty intense for people to understand why they're living that reality. So there is a great deal of benefit, 100%. And I think I've seen it.
Yeah, therapeutically speaking, you know, I think a lot of people, really astrologers, are going to be able to do great work not knowing about the nodes, you know, but a lot of the times you'll find as an evolutionary astrologer, anything going on with Capricorn, with Cancer, with Saturn, or with the moon in a person's chart, as I've been exploring, they're going to be entangled in the collective evolutionary narrative.
Correct.
And of course, everybody has their own personal evolutionary soul narrative, and all of us are entangled in the collective. Now, I think it just takes a certain type of person to be able to get therapeutic benefit from projecting or from, you know, exploring how their personal evolutionary narrative is entangled in the collective evolutionary narrative.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I love a lot about working with EA and being in a position to bring that narrative to people, and if that certain person is able to process it together with you, right? There's so much depth, there's so much richness, there's so much there that can be explored and understood. It really opens you up in ways that's profound. And to watch that process happen is, I wouldn't necessarily say it's not rare, like it, you know, but it's also not rare, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so when you do get the opportunity to do it, it's amazing.
And these are experiences that are probably common to a lot of people in today's time. You know, I find that what's interesting is I think some great work can be done in terms of conveying the usefulness of astrology on the whole when it comes to brassy astrological eras, because then we can kind of see them. You know, for us to talk about with anybody how their parents reflect the archetype of Pluto's South Node in Capricorn, for example, the patriarchal vibes, you got to work hard, you got to compete, and the internal experience of Cancer, of the moon, of the spirit of the soul and the soul chakras. Those experiences are fleeting in today's time. Although, because the North Node is there, we find a lot of people are evolving evolutionarily very strongly in Cancer and in all the places associated with Cancer, with the heart.
Gotcha.
Because of the pressure of the South Node on the Capricorn axis.
Yep, that's right.
You know, so I find it must be a very interesting and tricky thing for people to, but it's illuminating for a client, for example, or really for everybody, to speak to how the Capricorn vibrations for the last about pretty much 1500 years. I believe that's Pluto's South Node has been in Capricorn since about 500 AD.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah, you'd correlate that as well. So for all this time, people have been moving through this evolutionary narrative. Again, it's a collective evolutionary narrative. You know, something I like to think about is, you know, when it comes to these ages, since we know that the South Node has a past life correlation, we know this from dealing with the moon's nodes and with all the work that's been done on Rahu and Ketu, which is the North Node and South Node in Vedic astrology and all different types of astrology. We know that the South Node conveys a sort of a past life energy. So what we find in today's time with Pluto's South Node being in Capricorn is that there's a past life emphasis on all things related to Capricorn and Saturn. So that survivalistic root chakra kind of consciousness. Yeah. And I find myself asking, you know, like, what's the chicken and what's the egg here? Is a person born here and they have to face the energy of the South Node of Pluto in Capricorn? And the world is full of that sort of brass military kind of consciousness. But at the same time, since we are all born here, that means that we have past life karma, because we all were born with Pluto's South Node in Capricorn in our natal chart.
Yeah.
So does this make sense to you in terms of what we would say a person being incarnated here with past life karma related to Capricorn? And of course, that also means that they have a necessary integration to be done in Cancer and with the moon and with the heart and with the soul.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I'm thinking along those lines.
I gave you a lot there.
No, that's good. That's good. I like it. My sense of it is that yes, if we were to let's say that we are open to the idea that the soul has these multiple lives, right? That there is such a thing as multiple lives, right? We step into a Uranian state of awareness, and we accept that time is this earthbound experience beyond sort of bound to this earth space. You know, time has a very different, it operates differently. And so from the soul's perspective, these multiple lives that we would experience or live through, right, we would choose to incarnate in the solar system where the current sort of pattern that our solar system is moving through has got this South Node or this Pluto through Capricorn energy. Then yeah, that I absolutely think that we all incarnate with prior life memories that are directly linked to Capricorn itself. If I were to flush out that idea at a deeper level and probably try to explain myself more as to how I see it,
please,
I'd say that if you look back at human history, you'll see that there are these rises of civilizations, and then there are these falls of civilizations, right? So there's like peak experiences of different cultures that would rise to some form of structure and then would exist for a period of time. And then there'd be a kind of a senescent experience, right? It would come to its end. The genetic profile of that species would come to a certain limitation, and then that limitation would ultimately be the end of that civilization. So in my eyes, I'd say that the way that Pluto through Capricorn South Node would play itself out, and the way that we as human beings have incarnated in different times where Pluto South Node has existed, is that we've just participated in different civilizations and experienced diverse ways in which structure can express itself. Right? So if you think about the nature of the archetype of Capricorn, it's the instinct in it, the core foundation of this archetype is it forms structure. So whatever that looks like, depending on the nature of the consciousness at the time of the human species, whatever it was, that Capricorn will reflect the structure of that. So the Egyptians, for instance, were very much into their way of their world, right? They were pyramids, they would structure certain things. And then you had the Greeks and the Romans and civilizations before that, Mesopotamia. You can see how structure has been in different civilizations and the manifestation of it. So that's how I would say and see our human relationship to that, right? It's just different forms of structure that we've come to experience. So this current time that we're living in right now has got a very religious undertone to it, right? Institutions, structures that are, they've got a very kind of oppressive nature to it, but not indirectly oppressive. It's like or directly oppressive. It's indirectly oppressive. There's a certain goal or establishment that wants to put in place for control, whatever.
Government.
Exactly.
There's always been government, but in today's age of the South Node being in Capricorn, we know, just like it always is with the South Node, there's a brassiness to it. It's like, this is just, it's the nature of the nodes, really. Me being the Scorpio that I am, I relate things often in an erotic way.
Gotcha.
When you're in a sexual experience with somebody, you've got the fullness of your energy coming through, and that's very much like the South Node. And if left to your own devices, you're just going to be making love to yourself in a mirror.
Yeah.
But that's pure South Node without integrating the energy of the other person.
That's right.
On the other hand, if you completely throw out your energy, then you're going to be sitting with the other person's energy and not integrating it, not bringing them together in a shared evolutionary experience. And this is how, one of the key phrases that I use when I'm describing the node energy of the moon, particularly to a client or to anybody. I have this phrase that I say, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
So what this means is the South Node is kind of like this baby. Anytime we're dealing with the South Node, we're dealing with the energy that has been coming through already. And we want to wash it with the energy of the North Node.
Yeah.
But you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't want to completely throw away what's been coming through the South Node. Because I think, did you want to say something there, Simon?
Yeah, I was just going to say you actually can't. So that's one of the great kind of like shifts in modern astrology, is the ability to, or it's the recognition that the South Node is there as an inherent state. So
right, for sure, and you can't neglect it.
Yeah.
It represents a karma that we have to go through. So one of the things that we discuss in as a tropical Vedic astrologer, one of the things that we often think about in terms of integrating the nodes, I should say that a lot of people convey that Vedic astrology tends to be more fatalistic than Western. I play with the idea, so I'm just going to rock and roll with you here, Simon.
Nice.
An example I like to give is when we're dealing with the nodes. Let's say, let's take the outside of the Pluto factor. Let's just say, let's deal with the South Node, and we're talking about the evolutionary arc of Pluto's nodes. We're also talking about the moon's nodes, just the South Node energy in general.
Yeah,
we've got the South Node. Let's say a person's born with the South Node in Capricorn. And let's say Saturn is debilitated in Aries. And let's say it's right next door to, let's say Mars is in that sign as well. So Mars has a kind of a malefic, hot energy, especially when Mars is in its own sign, Aries. Mars is going to have a lot of strength. Saturn is debilitated in Aries. So Saturn's at a weak point there. So if we have the South Node in Capricorn, the dispositor of the South Node is having a difficult time, obviously, by being debilitated and with a hot malefic energy that is in its own sign, Mars.
Sure.
So this would be an example of somebody who is trying to integrate the South, the past life. And as an astrologer, we couldn't just say to them, yeah, you know what? You should just get away from Saturn. Saturn's causing you pain, so you've got to just stop dealing with Saturn.
Yeah.
Of course, we can't tell somebody that, because Saturn is one of the arbiters of the energy field. It's the arbiter of the root chakra. What we would have to tell such a person is practice a little bit of self-forgiveness, a little bit of self-love, and recognize that there is something in your energy field that you have to sit with. And don't take on too much. Don't bite off more than you can chew, but there is something that you got to chew here. So this is the nature of the South Node, is that whether it's well positioned or whether it's in a difficult position, it's something that we not only can't get rid of, but it's a key, it's the foundation through which we can reach the North Node. You know, if we were to give another example of someone with South Node in Capricorn, and let's say Saturn is in Libra, it's exalted. And let's say Saturn is conjunct Venus, or Venus is in its own sign, and Venus is a benefic. So this is a Saturn that has lots of plenitude, lots of benefic energy. It's a strong Saturn, it's exalted. So it has much more capacity to deal with the South Node in Capricorn.
Yeah.
Both of these people have karma related to the past life energy of the South Node in Capricorn. Both of these people cannot escape it. The difference is really, as I would understand it, ultimately, both of these people have such a past life emphasis of the South Node in Capricorn. They are looking to integrate Cancer. So they have to develop on the hardness of the South Node in Capricorn, which is in their energy. Would you say that both of these types of people, because they've got the South Node in Capricorn, they will be a Saturnian person? Let's start there, Simon. What would you say to that statement? Because we're getting you and I practice slightly different systems, as I'm a tropical Vedic astrologer. So it might be good for us to grip the shared experience of our different systems through a specific example like this.
Yeah. I would say that about 70% of the time that would be true.
That they would be a Saturnian person?
Yes, that's right. I would say 70% of the time that would be true from my direct experience. And so the reason why I leave out 30% is because if we were, and this is where my Mars and Venus and Virgo kind of have a difficult time to try to like discern between whether the details or just the Pisces piece is relevant here. So I get stuck in the details. But if say, for instance, this person had South Node in Capricorn, but the South Node is in the fourth house, right? So the location of the house could impact, as well as, say, for instance, let's say Venus is in Cancer. Let's say Mercury and Venus is in Cancer, or Moon is opposite Neptune, or Moon's in 12th house. Then you'd have some different parts of the chart could imply a person who's highly sensitive but gets incarnated into a family structure where there's a tremendous amount of rigidity.
Right.
And their internal structure is either to help that family recover from prior lifetimes where there's been a tremendous amount of that rigidity by being open and sensitive and emotional.
Right.
Or that they are oppressed in that environment, and then later on, sort of find a community or an environment that actually is more sensitive, in touch with their feelings and such. Because that's
beautiful.
The kind of, yeah.
I'm with you on that. Like we can almost say that the nodes are bringing the karma of that family because okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Very good, Simon. That's very clarifying. So because the South Node is in the fourth house in this case, this is a person who's living through a family structure that's very Capricornian because it's the South Node in the fourth house in Capricorn. But that doesn't necessarily, that's an environmental reality, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the soul that is incarnated here has any familiarity with the karma that it's presently experiencing.
Exactly.
Very clarifying, Simon. I appreciate, I love talking to you and I just love talking to other astrologers.
So I just wanted to add one more thing to that I felt
please
could contribute to the way that we would look at these things, right? So again, it's important to consider that when you are looking at the South Node, especially in the context of EA, right? And so EA is very much focused on what we just highlighted, which was the soul may choose a family structure that has a certain behaviorism to it, a certain sort of pattern to it, and yet the soul itself may not actually be part of that pattern.
Right.
And the nature of that karmic interaction can create a necessary evolutionary catalyst for either of them, whatever that may be, right? This person may realize, or the soul may realize through that rigidity that, this is not for them. Say moon balsamic phase to Saturn as an example, just in terms of adding these things here. So
beautiful.
Let's say you've got Saturn and Capricorn. So there's two things that I'll highlight. If say the planetary ruler or a dispositor, so Saturn sitting in Aries, one of the things that you want to look out for is the environment that this person could have been raised in had there were a lot of limitations. So one parent may have died, right? Depending on sort of other aspects, right? Maybe one parent died and it left
or
the
was
other
just
parent,
absent.
or absent, right? So in terms of the absent piece, what would be different in this example is that the absence would fall on that the soul carries a tremendous amount of responsibility.
Right.
Okay. So Capricorn is this heaviness that comes in. So the soul at a very young age immediately starts to carry the weight of the other parent that's missing. Okay. And so that's how you would see, it's like in this example with Saturn and Aries, for instance. And so in the other example was, say, one parent has died, right?
Right.
In this example, there's a tremendous amount of grief that is carried from the family or from the parent that's still alive. And that parent may be emotionally unavailable. So in the example with, say, Saturn and Aries as an example, the child grows up in an environment in which independence becomes a primary focus for their survival, right? Saturn and Aries, it's like
that would make sense.
And that there's one parent, it's one of them, and they start to develop a kind of reality in which their truth becomes, I shouldn't depend on people because they could be I could lose somebody.
That independence is crucial for them.
Exactly. So they may experience a life where relationships are tough because their natural South Node behaviorism is to remain reserved as opposed to opening up, right? Whereas, let's say Saturn in Libra, for instance, can show up as somebody who grows up in an environment in which both parents are extremely dependent on each other. And this is a child with Saturn in Capricorn, or Saturn in Capricorn.
Yep.
Saturn in Libra, where it is true that part of their reality is deeply conditioned by Libra themes. So as they get older in life, and we follow the thread of what we're talking about here, which is how does the South Node manifest itself as an ongoing experience throughout our lives? Well, this is a type of person that may actually avoid relationships because they saw that both parents sacrificed their own purpose in life, as an example. Like that's just one example. And so they perceive relationships as being dependence. They perceive relationships as not, there's no lack of boundaries, as an example. So this person may actually be learning how to establish boundaries. And so the North Node in Cancer could imply having to do emotional work so that they understand what their feelings are, what their emotions are, separate from another person. So
right,
that's
objectively.
exactly. So, boundary work as an example would be that dynamic. And the last thing that I wanted to say, which is, and we'll go deeper into this process when we kind of look at planetary nodes of the collective in terms of the South Node in Capricorn. But Capricorn as an archetype, as we see it today, is very Saturnized. It's got a Saturn quality to it that actually misleads us completely.
Capricorn does?
Yes. It's become very, we perceive it through the lens of Saturn, whereas the essence of Capricorn is actually not Saturn at all. It's actually an incredibly deep feminine sign that has its roots connected to incredible creativity. And there's actually quite an absence of repression in Capricorn. It's not about themes of
repression,
boundaries. Yeah, exactly. It's not like a discipline and work ethic and productivity, etc. Although those elements are there, but that's not what the essence of it's actually about. It's a highly spiritual sign. So I definitely want to kind of go back into that process to highlight that. But it's an emotional sign. So a lot of people that actually have South Node in Capricorn or Capricorn planetary systems themselves are actually learning about emotions
from an objective
standpoint. They're learning about their own feelings. They're learning about what the abyss is about. Like the Capricorn archetype is very much the connection to the origins of Pisces, of Neptune. So
very interesting.
The origins of our species in terms of, where the source comes from, we accredit it to Pisces, and in a sense that is true. But the formation of the physical structure of reality is a Capricorn feature. And so when we incarnate into this planet, we incarnate into the physical, but we come from the non-physical. You know what I mean?
Yes. But the physical has its own reality, its own form and structure.
Exactly.
Very interesting. And this is something that I think is very important work to discuss. I find myself, I almost, how I would riff on what you've been saying is that Saturn, I think its intention, in Vedic, all of the grahas are deities, meaning aspects of our own radiating agencies of spiritual agency. They're all the lights, the rays of Jyoti. And they can almost have a deity consciousness. The space that Saturn takes in the Gyan avatar, the avatar of the human body that all the planetary lights make up, Saturn creates the how I would think of it is that it is this, it's the earth pressure that is meant to individuate in an objective and constructive way. So it's interesting to me that you're saying that Capricorn isn't necessarily as Saturnian as most people convey it to be. What I'm kind of playing with here, we don't have to spend too much time on this, but I see that maybe you're correlating Saturn as being this very dour, difficult thing, just like most people see Capricorn as being this difficult thing. But as if I'm coming to understand you correctly, Capricorn is actually a richly emotional cardinal sign within the earth. And while we might experience it on Earth as a pressure that can cause this rigidity and even gives people the experience of repression, really the repression is only the limited expanse of the ego's understanding prior to evolving. When Saturn acts properly, it takes us away from that which was actually repressing us. Would you kind of agree with that?
I mean, and so this is a great opportunity to kind of contribute and add to what I'm sharing here is that if we think of Saturn in our current form, there is a set of structure, a set of language that we will use around it, right? And you kind of touched on some of those things, like people feel that Saturn's oppressive in its nature. And so the question is, Uranus plays a tremendous role in the way that Saturn goes from something that's highly protective to something that feels like you're stuck. You know, the analogy I like to use is that you're in a car, and the car, from the perspective of you inside of it, the shell protects you from the outside, right? Or if you're in your house, right? When you see the walls of your house and the doors, etc., they stop the elements from coming in.
Right. Cool.
Right? So Saturn is this protection mechanism, but
boundary.
Exactly. But the moment I start flooding your house, or there's a fire inside of your house, or your car is, starting to have toxic air come in it, all of a sudden that very nature, that very boundary itself, in an instant like that, starts to become something that's limiting, right? It's in your way. It's blocking you from your safety.
Beautiful. Right? That's wonderful.
Saturn, Uranus does that because there's something sort of like it shifts our perspective in a way in which we see that it's become redundant or senescent in some sense. And that's very much what happened during 2020 and 2021, or 2019 and 2020, when Saturn and Jupiter were actually in Capricorn on its own planetary nodes,
Agreed.
And we went through what we went through at that time, which, that's a cool part of the conversation that I'd love to get into. So
yeah, there's a lot there.
There's the nature of Saturn in our current time and age has become this productivity industrialized process. Whereas what I'm trying to get at here is that what Capricorn is really about is how we house our emotions in the body. And then if you think of ancient, well, not ancient, but very traditional and very long practiced traditions like yoga, for instance, help us feel the movement in our bodies, right? So that they're not like stiff and rigid, and the emotions are not moving through us. So Capricorn is the capacity to come into the body and feel our emotions move through us, right? So to process the nature of what we're going through.
Wonderful.
And that process itself, that process of our emotions and the way that we experience the impact of life itself, forms identity, which is the polarity point Capricorn, Cancer. And so in a sense, that pressure you're talking about is the rawness of what it means to be human in this form, Saturn. And then how do we navigate through that place and find purpose?
Right.
Capricorn is very much about the role that we play. That's why in our current form, Saturn, Capricorn will say, and a traditional astrologer say, that's your career. And it drives me nuts because there's this piece of Capricorn that is true. It is career, but none of us know why
or how that relates. Exactly.
And so, and that's because that fundamental piece of Capricorn is not, we don't address that. We don't give that space to breathe, right? Even breathing itself, even though it's a Uranian experience, the body is we're breathing through that.
Yeah. It opens.
You need a body, you need Capricorn. So the fact that you've incarnated is purpose in and of itself. And so at the core of Capricorn is really how we find our role, our specific space in time, right? Or our time and space.
Right. In a specific, wherever it is that we've incarnated.
Exactly.
I often think of, especially I see the axes as always being in this integrated behind the green curtain of phenomenal reality. And Capricorn I see as this objectification of the soul on planet Earth. And the moon is this internal, both of them are doing a gripping of sorts, but the Capricorn dimension of all of us is gripping the experience that we have on planet Earth. And it's our self. It is the self that's inside of all the astrological archetypes.
Yeah.
And that which is reaching through Cancer is also the self. And I do like to, describe them through a polarity because of course they are a polarity. It's a funny thing because they are one thing within the polarity. I digress.
That's a really important thing to make. I'm glad that you've acknowledged that, because in understanding astrology, we're seeing signs as separate pieces, but Capricorn is not anything without Cancer, and the other way around. They are one and the same. We just divide them so that we can kind of conceptualize their roles that they play within each other. But there is a binary that must be understood completely. That's why the nodes work.
Yeah, it's like two ends of a stick. You know, what's this end of the stick without the other end of the stick? It's all really just one, but there is two.
Exactly.
You know, funny sort of thing, right? So what I'm kind of where my brain is going at this present moment, I'm just loving this. You know, I feel like we've got an energy happening that I feel is conducive to good consciousness. When I think about Capricorn, I think about it as, you know, I can almost see that there will be times, for example, if someone goes through an intense transit to Capricorn, or even to earth signs, while, you know, because that would be trine, or even a square to Capricorn, such as an intense transit going through Aries or Libra, when someone has the South Node in Capricorn. The Capricorn ideal in any case is going to be this gripping and in a mature, objective way, the best way for your emotions to operate. And it seems to me the Capricorn principle kind of, you know, Capricorn and Cancer are always bumping knees. And the Capricorn principle at some level is to endure against the emotional needs. I'm being careful with what I say here because, of course, as we've just discussed, Capricorn is a part of the integration of the emotions. But when we look at the duality of Cancer and Capricorn, we could say, let's say Saturn at its best is a person who has integrated their emotions in order that they can spend time and go and say, perform some greatness. That's so that they're standing out in their field. Let's say, for example, someone who wants to invent a very important invention. Let's say Albert Einstein. His wife says, honey, you sure you don't want to just come in and hang out with me? You've been working awful hard on those equations. And Albert Einstein says, honey, I've got to let everything go and put my time in this equation. If he has a good Saturn, he will be able to still the revolving world of everything and focus in a determined way, focus his emotions so that he can endure to get past the unstable aspects of reality that otherwise are pulling him out of this goal. Hopefully, if he's got a good moon, he will at some point say, okay, honey, let's go hang out and listen to some music because I'm becoming very dry over here.
Yeah.
What would you say about the way I kind of just put that polarity there?
I'd say that you're okay. So let's just try not like let my Sagittarius take over here. And sound.
Oh, well, feel free because, you know, I always invite people to, you know, I don't want to put this in a way that is not conducive to the more specific way that you've already talked about Capricorn. So feel free to say whatever you think about that duality.
I think that what you just described is exactly what I'm saying. You just used a story to articulate it, right? Very sage. Mm-hmm. And so the essence of what we're talking about here, the essence of what I'm trying to say about Capricorn Cancer archetype was portrayed in there, because at the end you talked about the relationship, ultimately the relationship between work, something that one is devoted to, and then the necessary need for human connection, right? That emotion or peace. And so so when I talk about Capricorn being Saturnized, what has happened is that people have found their sense of purpose, right, in the external. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that during COVID times, when people's sense of definition, Capricorn, their role that they felt that they were playing in their lives, no longer had the same weight, or that things changed, people couldn't work, or people's jobs changed. It affected them in a deep way. Like people went through a lot of people went through this loss of identity.
For sure.
And the reason why that's the case is because the Capricorn archetype, the way that the Capricorn archetype it was portrayed through the Saturnized thing was, I'm going to go out into the world and forge some legacy based on an external societal conditioned role. And while that's not necessarily incorrect in terms of the context of the planetary node of Pluto in Capricorn and Saturn and Jupiter, there's an emptiness, there's a hollowness that can come out of that process, which is my identity, Cancer, is linked with that external definition. And if that gets threatened, then my internal self gets threatened, which is not the case.
Bingo.
If you're in a job that has highly specialized because of a skill set, and that job ends, your skill sets and everything have not changed. You're still the same person. You just are not going to that specific location to do that specific role and identifying it through the feedback of the environment. Does that make sense?
Certainly. But a lot of people will identify with how good I was doing in this job. I was so loved. My workers loved me. My boss thought I was such a good worker.
Exactly. And so that's the Saturnized piece. It's the sense of self, the sense of definition, the role, the purpose is almost in a sense an outer projection that has become overly identified with actual self. Whereas Capricorn refers to the path you're walking and in the inquiry into why that path is the one that you're walking. So even though I sort of do evolutionary astrology over here, I've got Saturn in the 10th house, the sun is there, Mercury's there, Pluto's there. The question is, what does this role do for me internally? Who am I internally, right? Can I bring forth that personality that I am outside of this conversation in here? And so there's a direct correlation that if you talk to me outside of this conversation and you talk to me here, I'd be the same person.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
There's an alignment of the inner self. So nurturing that inner emotional world and connecting with that inner emotional world is the role of Capricorn, right? Capricorn is informed by Cancer. So,
very cool.
Coming back to the emotional body is what I'm really referring to here. So instead of us eating up our emotions, right? This is Saturn, right? He eats his own children. Okay, we eat our own emotions, right, to digest them, but we can't digest them, so the emotions come back up, and that's what he's afraid of. That he would sort of Saturn would throw up his children, and they would come to kill him. So he keeps sort of like stuffing them down.
Whoa, that's amazing. That's
what we do, right? We suppress our feelings because we're afraid of what comes up because it might consume us, and that's what ultimately it's what Capricorn is pointing to, is that your purpose at the higher spiritual level is not found in the outside world per se through the job title. It's found in the connection to the deeper inner world that you are navigating, and that definition
you are truly
exactly. And our emotions are telling us that, right? So they're informing us of that process.
Damn, that's so clarifying. I would like to ask you, Simon, would you say it's correct that to bring Pluto into this, our beloved arbitrator Pluto, would you say it's almost correct that in today's time, there is a trap? And this, I would almost convey it as the trap because we're talking about it. What has happened is that Saturn has swallowed its children, swallowed its emotions, and they're burbling up inside its stomach and they're coming to get them. And in today's time, Saturn has swallowed its children. And because we have the brassy South Node in Capricorn of all over the place, it's capitalism, it's greed 101, and the world wants more of this capital. The world wants more business as usual. It wants more business. So a person could get a wife or a husband who does enough of the trick to kind of just like get their emotions figured out a little bit, make me dinner, we can have sex, whatever, and it's not even like a special thing for this person. They go to bed, they wake up, they got all these emotions, and they push them down, and they go to the job. And because in today's time we have South Node of Pluto in Capricorn, Pluto comes and says, "Great job. You're really doing a good job of swallowing your emotions. And you know what? If you keep swallowing your emotions, you keep working hard as my wage slave for another couple of years, I'm going to give you a raise and you're going to be the employee of the month." And there are the world is full of the encouragement on the, I have to check because I'm sure I'm maybe correlating with more of this repressive archetype of Saturn. But I'm trying to bring in the correlation, maybe it's the South Node of Pluto being in Capricorn that's instigating this repressive element where it can be blown out of proportion, where we will be congratulated for swallowing our emotions. But what will happen in today's time is we have lots of would-be entrepreneurs who do this for a while, they catch fire a little bit, and they get a little bit of success. But the success they gain materially is drowning the children, the emotional children they keep swallowing. And at some point, they're going to end up 40 years old in their Uranus opposition, and they're going to have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots to talk about over there, and I'm pretty excited that you went down that road, right? It's something that I feel very passionate about when it comes to breaking down archetypal paradigms and kind of helping us re-engage with them in a way where almost like the what's the word? The genesis of the archetype is what we work with, as opposed to the conditioned nature of it based on our human fears and such. So one thing that I want to start off with is one of the reasons why Capricorn has a Saturnized, one of the reasons why Capricorn has the Saturnized context to it. We were talking about swallowing the children, right? And do good is that Capricorn's role is about definition. It's about boundary. Okay, it's about form. So for us as human beings, when Capricorn looks down at Cancer, the archetype of Cancer, what we're essentially looking at is the edge of the boundary where consciousness meets the ego. Okay, so the Cancer archetype is literally the boundary that exists between the deep space and our internal world. Okay, so Cancer is very aware. Natural Cancer is naturally trining Pisces in the zodiac, and it's a natural trine to Scorpio. So it's very aware that there is a thin line between life and death. Right. It's very aware that that's things could happen at any point, and there is very little protection. So vulnerability is deeply associated with Scorpio, but it's Cancer that informs Scorpio that like if you get into a car and you drive, like there's no guarantee that you can not get into a car accident, right? There are going to be things that are dangerous, right? And so even if you think about the imagery of the ocean, right? There's the ocean, Pisces, and then there's the sand, right? There's the beach. And when those two pieces interact like that, you can almost feel that Cancer is that realization that earth and groundedness and Orion earth qualities are here, but there's also something vast beyond that can consume you.
The infiniteness of the imagination.
Yeah, that's right. So, Capricorn is being deeply informed by Cancer that, chaos exists, and it's not like it's far away. Chaos exists 3 meters away from you, from somebody that's very unstable. As an example, right? They've had so much trauma happen to them, and they're so angry about things, they'll just take it out on you. Okay.
Can happen at any time.
Exactly. So the mechanism that actually drives Capricorn to repress its feelings is the realization that chaos is on the other side, and that is very uncomfortable. Capricorn does not like chaos in its context. The underlying principle of Capricorn is to form that structure to help you. So another way to understand this is, let's say a baby is being carried in the womb, right? The womb is being protected by a very thin layer of skin, to the outside world. There can be danger. And so that's why there's a tremendous amount of protection for women who are, carrying, right? Because, if you put a pregnant lady into a car, there's going to be a heightened sense that this is a dangerous thing, right? A car accident can happen, you could lose the baby. So you get with the point, right? There's a subtle awareness of protection that embodies the realization of something that is that needs safety and security. So repression, the mechanism for repression stems from the realization that chaos is just on the outside. So
for sure,
a lot of people who are very OCD or like to keep things in order and stuff like that actually have suffered quite a lot of uncertainty or unpredictability, or a lot of experiences where chaos is at the other side there. So they keep it in control.
It's always there. And so they have these things that they've integrated to constantly keep themselves in a boundary.
Correct. So
it's for better or worse.
Exactly. So what happens with our emotions is that there isn't any tools that we've had for a very long time that have helped us understand what emotions are. So in the past, religion would call it the devil, right? And other forms call it like exorcisms or demons. In today's world, with Pluto transiting through Capricorn, there's a strong movement on somatic healing, of regulation, work like Dr. Gabor Mate that's helped people understand.
I love Gabor Mate.
So you can see that the more that we've become conscious of our emotional world, the more we've been able to grapple with the uncertainty that is emotions. And so we've now allowed them to come out. And so it's kind of like the point in what you're talking about here is that I'd say Pluto through Capricorn has exposed the structures that were previously instilled at a time where our understanding of emotional regulation was in its infancy. There was no capacity for it. So what we did was we put walls and armor and all of that around it because we didn't understand that, right? And that would then eventually look like addiction as a way to kind of cope with that.
Yeah.
So we naturally return to the primordial essence, ironically, right? Now today, this is the case. And I just want to make one little pointer, and then I want to hand the conversation back to you. Sure. Is that you can see again why people a society would honor ambition as a value if the construct of the society's economic structure was founded upon industrialized values. So the more productivity that you created, the more that meant for growth. And so this is very much a Capricorn theme, right? So we've got a goal, we've got a direction, that's where we're going, and we're going to forge ahead.
For sure.
And anything that comes in that destabilizes it, like, let's say, Coca-Cola, does something dumb, and the world catches on, the media, social media comes on, and people become aware that this is, there's something bad in it, right? What you're going to see is sort of people boycotting it.
Right.
Pluto through Capricorn, or in the context of Capricorn dynamics, Coca-Cola is not going to turn around and go, oh, we messed up. Like, we should own this. We should understand, like, connect with the community. Sort of, this is what we're going to do. Ideally, we would want to do that. And
that would be the Cancer. That would be the North Node pole.
Exactly. Right? But they don't. They're afraid of what could happen. They were afraid of losing their power. They're afraid of the instability that comes along. So what they do is they reinforce their position out of fear. Okay, so that's kind of, again, there's the fear of chaos that leads to reinforced Capricorn structures. And so that's what happened in 2020, right? There was a tremendous amount of people wanting to get things going back to normal, because the disruption that came along with sort of COVID, in whatever format it came in, disturbed people. right?
sure.
People found themselves living in environments that they hadn't been because they were running away from their emotions.
Totally. Yeah.
See?
And their emotions were running amok because of this strongly instigated boundary
Yes.
that was so afoot at that time.
So that's what Pluto did. It exposed pre-existing senescent structures within the collective around how we understand emotions. And the way that that came about was chaos. I mean, if you were living in the States during 2020, right, which you are, and a lot of our watchers are going to be there, it felt very unstable.
Right.
So there's a case to be made that when emotions come to the surface at a collective level, it doesn't feel like we want to kind of let them out, right? We want to push them back in.
Right, because we're busy doing whatever we've been doing. I remember so many people before that pandemic happened, people were just getting businesses going. People had businesses going for 10 years. I'm in the music world. My band, all these musical bands that had just been getting on their feet, all got flushed out because of this chaos that had come in. And it's interesting to me that, when we think of the true archetype of Capricorn, as we've been discussing, it's not necessarily to strictly make it so that there would be no chaos. That's not necessarily an evolved sense of Capricorn. An evolved Capricorn is like an old boy who's a 60-year-old person who is like my mother and father's generation had Saturn and Capricorn, and so I know a lot of folks from their generation, and a lot of them, because they're old, their Saturn and Capricorn is coming through and manifesting as a person, not necessarily who evades chaos. Saturn at its best doesn't evade chaos. Saturn doesn't invite chaos. No. It's objective about it.
Yeah.
It's matter of fact about it. Oh, this is happening? Great. I've been preparing for this whole time. So when Pluto moves through Capricorn, I would, if I'm reading you correctly, a lot of people, there's all sorts of fun conspiracies that can all be discussed, and they all have great things to talk about. Not to say that there's not such things.
Yeah.
Ultimately, from an astrological perspective, Pluto moving through Capricorn had at least the astrological intention not to remove chaos, but to integrate our capacity to deal with a Capricorn, a cardinal earth sign. Cardinal is going to have opportunistic movements and shaking. Yeah. And it's the earth factor that allows us to remain solid within the moving waters of chaos.
Yeah.
Now, I love the way you talk about things the way you do, Simon. Now, I have something I would like to just point out and just sort of move towards.
100%.
But before we do, Simon, I should ask you, you and I didn't talk too much about time or anything like that. We're about an hour and 10 minutes into this conversation. Time flies. I think that it's also good to keep things tight when it comes to YouTube. Sure. What do you say about us mentioning another, I'd like to talk about this 4-square grid. It's essentially a good moon, bad moon, good Saturn, bad Saturn in terms of this this axis. Maybe we'll give ourselves a deadline and say like another 10 minutes. Or do you...
Until we feel like we finish, or in terms of just on that specific conversation?
No, in terms of us finishing in general, because I've had you on here for a lot of... Do you have a timeline in mind? Do you want to go for...
I'm pretty chill with another 20 minutes, man.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that works good for me too, Simon. Yeah. Maybe we'll shoot for the half an hour after the hour.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome, my friend. Okay, I'm very glad to have you here spending this time with me. So we'll just rock and roll until about that point. What I wanted to mention is this 4-square grid idea.
Okay.
I didn't make, eventually I'm going to be making diagrams for this kind of thing. Now, again, we have to consider that me as a Vedic oriented person, there are a lot of times where in Vedic astrology, we consider that a person can have objectively difficult planet positions, in which case, really, we all, in my understanding, we all have planets in good positions and we all have planets in bad positions. And it's the flux between all of these that makes us what we are.
Yeah.
And this doesn't necessarily say anything other than the fact that, you know, like every good yogi knows, a limb that needs a good stretch, it's just that much more delicious when you stretch it. A planet that's in a difficult astronomical position or astrological position is only that much more delicious when you integrate it, when you become understanding of it and roll with it while integrating it into the best possible consciousness.
Yeah.
The Vedic people talk about how even beyond the astral spheres, we are a causal consciousness that has the will to transcend what's been given in our karma. But sometimes transcending doesn't mean throwing it all away. It's really more of this South Node sort of consciousness. So the Vedic people are like that. The whole thing is a description of Ketu and Rahu. Like that's the center of it.
Yeah.
So with all that being said, something I've been thinking about lately is this idea that, of course, we all are here. We've all been born with the South Node of Pluto in Capricorn. And the North Node of Pluto is in Cancer. And it's been here since 500 AD. So for those of us who are here, we have this long nodal entanglement with the collective evolutionary narrative of Pluto's South Node in Capricorn. How I can kind of consider this is almost as if, you know, we could have a 4-square axis. Let's say a person has the ability to be well established in all things related to Capricorn, or a person could be still evolving with regards to what exactly Capricorn means for them. And that includes not just Capricorn, but all things related to Saturn, as Saturn is the dispositor. So we can also consider that people born here today have to digest and deal with the karma related to Pluto's North Node being in Cancer. And therefore, a person can have a good and properly structured orientation towards Cancer in the Moon, or a person can have difficulty and karmic obstructions and a lack of familiarity and integration with what is represented by Cancer in the Moon. So I've been building this 4-square narrative. You know, I could kind of put it this way. Let's say we've got a person with a good moon.
Okay.
Whatever exactly that might mean. Through our different systems, we might convey this differently. But let's just say a person has, even beyond astrology, the person has integrated Cancer well. Now, let's say this is a person, while they've integrated Cancer well, they will start it off this way. They have not integrated Capricorn well. They have difficulty being objective. They have difficulty moving themselves into growth experiences that require endurance.
Okay.
So let's say they got a good moon, they got a good relationship with their mother, and they got a good relationship. They've got their mother and their father. And let's say they have a lover in their life, and the lover, they're very patient with their lover. They listen to their lover, and they are responsible to their lover.
Sure.
But they have a lack of the Saturn and Capricorn integration.
Okay.
So they try to go out into the world, they go to their job, and they hope that it's easier. They hope it's more emotionally fitted to who they are. And it requires a lot of responsibility. It requires a sort of independence to build themselves in some kind of company corporate ladder. And they're just not good at that part of it. But they have a good moon. They have a good relationship with all things related to the moon. So they might not climb today's capitalistic ladder that far. And even they might have a bit of trouble because due to the integration that Capricorn represents, let's say their lover has something emotionally that happens to them that neither of them can control. Let's say her father dies and she has difficulty with that. So the person has a good moon and they are there for their lover. And they go to work and their lover texts them and says, I really need to talk to you right now. And they're on the line and they can't text their lover. If they have a weak Saturn, they'll kind of crumble and they'll drop what they're doing on their work and go into the bathroom and call their lover. That's kind of like what I'm saying there is that while they have a good moon, they still need to integrate all things related to Saturn. So we have a person with a good moon who can either have ill Capricorn or ill Saturn things, and it stops them from developing on a career or developing something solid in their independent lives that they can be proud of.
Yeah.
We also have a person who has a good moon and who has a good Saturn. Okay. So let's say this is the ideal thing for all of us, is that we have a good moon in Cancer and a good Saturn, good Capricorn. Such a person could wield today's very capitalistic times. They could have some kind of good business. They work hard enough to save enough money. And they take their excess money, they make an investment, and the investment is well thought out because they're savvy to Capricorn. They're savvy to today's economics, and it makes them money. And because they've got a good moon and a good Saturn, they're not a workaholic.
Sure.
They care enough to actually integrate things with their loved ones, but to still have a reasonable success in the material capitalistic world. That's the idea. Now let's look at someone who has a good Saturn, but a weak Cancer, weak moon. We're talking about many people who are incarnated in today's time. Daddy has provided them with a bank account so that they can go and make investments, and they're rich. They're new rich. But because they don't have a strong moon, they are like many of the lizardy, decrepit dinosaurs that are in the rich high ends of society today, where they are very business strong because they've been blessed to take advantage of Pluto's South Node in Capricorn in an advantageous way. Because it's Saturn, because Pluto's South Node is in Capricorn, their karma can take a good advantage of that. They have good Earth in their chart, and they can take advantage of it. But they are a workaholic and an alcoholic, and they have no emotional truth. They have been put through the paces of their father's business plan, and again, they've gained integration of a business sort. They can endure and do lots of business things, but deep inside they're crumbling emotionally because all this shit that they're dealing with actually means nothing to their emotional reality that they would like to be enduring. So we can see at least, can you see what I'm building there in terms of this 4 square, good moon, good Saturn, bad Saturn, in terms of today's Capricorn axis?
Yes, I see what you're thinking and how you're thinking. So I have a few questions for you.
Please.
One of them is, is it okay to work through and flush out these ideas that you have, and ultimately to try and strengthen them And so my thinking is to point out a few pieces that I think I need some more clarity on, or maybe we need to kind of like deepen the conversation around to find it. So
please,
just to point at some pieces that I feel could be strengthened in that process. So my curiosity and my instincts are leading me to ask you this question, which is, are you looking to strengthen, ground these ideas that you've shared out right now, or should I just kind of like respond to what you've shared? Just as in,
I would be curious. I feel like I wouldn't want to strengthen them if you and I both came to a thought that maybe it wasn't that strong in the first place. So, with that being said, because I'd rather hear your brass take on. I feel like I could be making a 4 square. I'm seeing something and saying it's 2D when it's actually like 3D and 4D. And I think that's what you might be getting at. And I'd love to hear if that's where you're coming from.
All right. So here's my thinking, and here are some additional thoughts to consider. Okay. So
For sure.
I think I'm struggling with the language around Saturn being good, Moon being bad, kind of dynamic. Okay. Now, my sense of it is that in order to single them out within the whole, they need to have those labels. So I'm not sure if those labels accurately represents maybe what you're talking about. So you can kind of help with that process.
For sure.
Right?
For sure, Simon.
And the reason, and so my deeper thinking around that is that from my perspective, I may be completely oblivious. I may be completely, like missing the plot here, and I need my own personal biases reflect back to me. But I struggle to see planetary systems in favor or non-favor, like Saturn. Okay, what I tend to give space, like how these archetypes manifest, is like, what is the soul chosen, or what is the consciousness chosen as an archetypal theme to come into? So if the memory of the soul has a lot of repression prior to this life, then it would have a Saturnian configuration that would reflect the reality of the soul.
Right.
So it's almost like this chart mirrors the reality of the soul, as opposed to the chart informing the soul of its life, as it were. It's like it's the other way around. So if I were to see, if I had to look at Saturn in the charts, and I'd say Saturn in Leo, for instance, right? To me, in your first example, it was interesting how you talked about a good moon but a struggling Saturn.
Right.
Okay. And one of the ways that you described this person's relationship to their partner was through responsibility, which to me is emotional maturity, which would indicate that they've got a strong Saturn. See what I mean, right? So the piece of integration piece, I want to rework a bit to kind of strengthen what that would mean. I think you're onto something, but I'd kind of just want to refine some stuff. So when I look at Saturn in a person's birth chart, when I work with it consciously, not as a symbol for this is who you are, but more as what have you experienced that symbol is telling me about your story. So let's say Saturn's in Leo, for instance, right? Now, this is where that good and bad theme can come in. Let's say Saturn square Mercury, right? Saturn is in Leo square Mercury in the 8th house. And this is a person who grew up in an environment where there was that mom had, or dad, for instance, struggled to express himself. And would oftentimes, this is the Mercury in Scorpio, right? There's an underlying sense that they struggle to express themselves, validate their authority.
Right.
So what could happen is, in, say, person A's example, where they go out into the big world, the role model of the parent that showed the child, this is what boundaries look like, this is what authority looks like, was absent. So they may go into the world and struggle to identify healthy boundary or healthy establishment of oneself self-understanding, right? Some
For
one's
sure.
self-authority. So they may struggle, they may be timid, they may be shy.
Because the
Piece.
Mercury is square Saturn.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
it's communicating about those boundaries is kind of
Yeah.
blinded in that way.
Yeah, there can be a challenge around that, right? But if we go a little bit deeper, what I encourage people to understand about working with their Saturn is the process of the child maturing into the adult.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're children, we are at the mercy of the adults. So the child will come up to the parents and say, hey, can I have this ice cream? And the parent, from a Saturnian perspective, understands the broader scope of boundaries and responsibility and is this a good choice or not? Whereas the child is just acting on impulse, right? Okay. So part of our power, our ability to be self-governing internal, right? To say, this is what I want, sort of only becomes more available to us as we get older. So at the age of 14, we rebel against parents, Saturn opposition. It's the stage of maturation where we're actually saying, no, I'm learning how to realize I can also make my own decisions for myself, right? That's why it's such a conflict at that time.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful.
So Saturn initially in a person's chart, you want to fish for and you want to try and understand at which point in the emotional development of their Saturn are they at? Is the Saturn still like a child where they're asking other people to behave a certain way in order to not let them feel their own feelings of being out of control, which is what the child feels, right? And so, right, that we externalize it. It's like, oh, you didn't do that, right? That's what Saturn is, right? It points fingers at other people and says, you didn't do that. But what it's really saying is, I didn't feel comfortable with that experience, right? Because those emotions were intense for me. So I'm going to project them onto you, right? So Saturn would be that archetype of placing the expectation or the role into the other person.
Externally in that way.
Precisely. So it's Saturn really in our chart is how we are taking that power back until eventually we come into ourselves and we're like, hold on, actually, I put myself in this relationship and some choices that I made contributed to my own abuse, right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's fully like that. The other person's still responsible, but part of that, owning that responsibility, owning your time, your karma, your boundary, right? Your definition, you're owning that and carrying that weight's really intense. So,
it's interesting.
South Node, yeah.
I was just going to say that, I almost see, because I had mentioned that I think people often convey the Vedic thing to be fatalistic in terms of this good and bad dynamic. Because, when I think of a person with Mercury, Saturn in Leo, and the Mercury is square to it in Scorpio, there is certainly an archetype of the person needing to learn to communicate about Saturn and there being this difficulty. But, it's hard to say, like, there will be people who take to that lesson more readily than others.
Yes.
Whether regardless of the parents, we could have a person who are born of the same parents and the parents operate under the very same dynamic. But as I understand it, if one person has ease in the chart with regards to what Saturn represents, they would more readily and more quickly learn the objective nature about how their parent was absent. They couldn't give them the Mercury consciousness. And so a good Saturn person, like, Saturn is exalted in Libra because it can deal with other, when Saturn's well placed, it can see how what happened to it, it is not necessarily its fault.
Yes.
It's considered in a collective. Saturn in Aries is more readily like, I'm taking everything on my end, which is these people that so readily kind of like can be frustrated at themselves. Oh, everything's falling apart again. That story of my life. That's Saturn in Aries, right?
That's right.
So yeah, go ahead there, Simon.
I was just going to say, so if I were to kind of look at your model again, the tweaks that I would make is that the lessons that those archetypal symbols are reflecting about the soul's consciousness and where it's been and what it's working through would probably render it would give agency to how somebody can make sense of a weaker Saturn, as it were, or an underdeveloped Saturn, right? In that sense. And so in that way, you can kind of go, okay, look, your Saturn sitting in your head, it's in Leo. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that, the part of your integration to coming into wholeness is stepping into that power.
Right.
So part of your experiences are to go out there and learn how to use your voice. And some of that environment may be in places where a lot of people just have a big voice and you can be intimidated by that. But you're either going to learn that lesson by learning about that power, or you're going to incarnate a few times until you realize that you have that power.
And that it's a part of who you are.
Yes.
And Leo can be a thing that's hard for everybody to wield. It's the sun, and someone's got to be a leader somewhere along the lines.
Yes.
And people with Saturn and Leo often find themselves taking on, well, if no one's going to be the leader, then I guess it's going to be me.
Yes.
And that's part of their karma. Right. So, there's probably lots of people with Saturn and Leo that it's kind of a lot of planets are dull notes in people's charts. They're there. It's part of their experience, but they wouldn't go to an astrologer, and an astrologer wouldn't look at that and say, yeah, that's clearly what's going on with you. Part of my interest here is to discuss really that all of us in the age of Capricorn, which is what I'm kind of how I'm thinking of things these days, is we are in this age of Pluto's South Node in Capricorn. Yep. So that anyone born at our time is going to have karma that is going to involve them with dealing with wherever their Saturn is. And there's going to be a slight emphasis of it because of the trap that's available in today's capitalistic time to, there's always somewhere where you can piss away your energy that should be used for internal cognition, self-reflection, all of the Cancer archetypes that are so beloved by for self-health's sake and real spiritual meaning. So the objective things that we do in this capitalistic world that we grind through in order to survive and stay alive, whether we take to that naturally or we don't, we are all in this age seeking to integrate the heart chakra of Cancer, the Ajna chakra, and all things related to the soul. Whether a person has an easy time with the brassy materialism of the South Node in Capricorn, or whether they have a hard time with it. Something I've been saying lately with regards to this is that, lead and gold both weigh the same from the perspective of enlightenment.
Yes.
Right. So whether you have a Saturn that's positioned in a way, like the easy example I like to give is that, Saturn being exalted in Libra with Venus there, they might have things that encourage them to integrate all things related to Saturn in the way that's healthiest, which is that you don't take it personally. You don't take things, they might be encouraged to do that. To not take the lessons of growth personally. Don't take it personal that you didn't know the lesson. Forgive yourself for not knowing whatever lesson it is that you need to learn. Whereas people with Saturn, let's say in Aries with Mars there, there's a drivenness to get it right and to be critical to themselves. And that can be a bit diminishing of the sustaining power that Saturn's supposed to have. But to bring in what you've already mentioned, wherever it is, if Saturn is in a position like that, I think it would be right to say it's not. I think this is a language that I'm glad I'm talking with you about it, Simon. You had the boundary power to mention to me that really calling that a bad Saturn is something that's a Vedic habit. That I think that I talk to a lot of Vedic people about how it's not good to just say this is a bad karma. it is possible to say that you might experience difficulty with the nature of this karma.
Yes.
Right. But however it's going to work out, both of these people could work at the same job. Both of these people could be a high executive, whether it's the Saturn in Libra with Venus there, or whether it's the Saturn in Aries with Mars there. Both these people could work hard to be a great, profound, powerful executive. It might feel more painful for the person with Saturn in Aries. But regardless, both of these people need to do what they're doing in the material world while not neglecting to integrate Cancer. And then that's its own whole thing, how they're going to integrate that.
Yeah, I hear you there a lot. And the piece that I want to add to that, I also noticed the time.
Yeah, I'm noticing it too.
Maybe culminate with this.
Sure.
But is that, it's interesting to me because one of the position that I take with the Saturn archetype, and again, I maybe swaying more towards this position leaves me lacking the understanding of something that I'm leaving behind. So I'm open to that. But if I were to see Saturn in Libra and Saturn in Aries, right? If the planet is reflecting the nature of the consciousness of the soul, then if you have two people who are climbing sort of a ladder, right, in a work environment, the person with Saturn in Libra would find themselves more attuned to Libra themes and excelling in that area. Whereas somebody with that, where the challenges and the questions that life presents, like, okay, so the challenge is for us to make very important, quick decisions on the go. The Libra person is going to fail at that. Whereas the Saturn person in Aries is going to thrive at that, right? Because Aries as an archetype is, I'm here. Let's do this. I'm here, right?
Right.
So in a way, this person's consciousness is orientated towards behaviorisms that are Aries-like, because that is necessary for their evolution.
Right.
If they didn't show up in Aries, they wouldn't be, in a sense, kind of unlocking dynamics, emotional dynamics that are linked with their evolutionary path. So they may need to integrate Aries experiences as a way to facilitate deeper evolutionary patterns. And so if, like, say, for instance, I say to them, Saturn's bad here, and you run out of ideas too quickly, it's kind of like letting them perceive their experience and their reality as, this is a part that I need to work on. Whereas I would be more sort of like giving agency, which is, if I listen to the person's story and this, I get the understanding of what the soul is about, you'll probably find that the Saturn and Aries person needs to show up more.
Right.
That they need to take charge more. They need to be like, hey, and the Libra Saturn will look at the Aries person and say, why are you so like headstrong? Why don't you just take a seat back over here and just read the room? Right.
Right. That's a great. For sure.
And the Aries person will be like, yeah, thanks for the feedback, right? I know sometimes I'll show up in a boardroom and I've got a cap on and everybody else doesn't. That's where the Saturn Libra will thrive, because he understands the social context. And in that sense, yes. But let's say
that's how I would have put it too.
Person needs to fire somebody. He's going to be like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to hurt his feelings. I don't want to, what happens if that? And it's like, yeah, that's good. He's thinking that, but the indecisiveness of that process is not what's needed at the time. And so it's
not
beautiful
the strength. Yeah,
exactly. So in a way, I almost kind of see that each archetype have strengths in certain decisions or certain challenges, and then in other cases will sort of not thrive. And ironically, it's the polarity of that sign that comes to save them.
Yeah, that I was thinking. Yeah, I was thinking that too. I would almost say in such a situation where I would agree generally that a Saturn in Aries person would probably take to firing somebody more readily than a Saturn in Libra person would. Part of me would consider that, because we know the archetype of Saturn is exalted in Libra, and that is a presentation almost of Saturn at its natural. Astrology is telling us a lesson there about how both of them ought to consider things overall. Where the person with Saturn in Libra, you're right, they would you know, when they got to fire somebody, they got to lean into the Aries a little bit and take their empathy out of the equation.
Yeah.
But, you know, and so would a person with Saturn in Aries would, if they had to fire somebody too, they would be they'd be lucky to be in the Aries place, but they would also be good to lean into the Saturn in Libra to think about it in the sense like, what would my boss think? What is best for the company? I'm not firing someone selfishly because they didn't bring me my coffee yesterday.
Yes.
So both need to think about the archetype, but would still be well served by their individual space.
Yeah. And so in a way, this kind of like ties this, to me, it ties up what you were talking about with the 4 points.
Mm-hmm.
In this sense, right? What I would say is that if the Saturn is more emphasized in one example and the moon is not emphasized, as the moon is not present, the emotional dynamics are not present, then the moon helps unlock the rigidity in Capricorn. And if there's too much emotional sort of waveling around, then Capricorn comes along and says, look, you need a little bit more structure in this process. So that's how I would see how you could kind of balance how each, you know, if it was a stronger Saturn, then it needs to look to the Capricorn, the Cancer archetype as a way of balancing, and the other way around, right? And that's ultimately what would probably, that's how I would see
beautiful
equation show up.
And I think how I see it is that people will emphasize one way or the other, where they'll stick to a lot of the Capricorn stuff at the expense of Cancer as well. I know a lot of people who are very Cancer in today's time, very spiritual, but they don't have the grounding of Saturn. It's almost like they're inclined to ignore it because it's so, I got a lot of important Saturn figures in my chart, and I love to play the Saturn card and say, hey, everybody, don't forget that this is still a part of the 12 archetypes of the zodiac.
Yes. Yeah.
But Simon playing Saturn today.
Yeah.
Well, I love it, Simon. You, as usual, my friend, I love discussing things with you because you hold the space for me digging into things that oftentimes I go off the beaten curb, and you hold the space for me, Simon. I love having you on my channel, and I'm very glad to have brought you here today to discuss some of these things regarding Pluto with its South Node in Capricorn and the North Node in Cancer. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here with me and my audience today. Do you have any thoughts before we split, before we call her a day?
Nothing's coming to mind at the moment. I would love to have a conversation with you around Pluto and the nodes in terms of like, you know, going deeper into that process. And I think there was also something that you wanted to talk about as well, that maybe we can kind of, you know, next time we meet, put the two together.
That sounds great to me.
Professional.
Yeah, that sounds great to me, Simon, because I would love to be able to chat with you like this at any time. We can either do a thing where you and I hang out and we're not live and we can just discuss where we want to go and then have another session after that, or we can just rock and roll like this. Either way, I'll be emailing you, and I'd love to do this again.
Sweet. Fantastic.
Awesome. So thank you for everybody who is hanging out with us on the live. We had lots of people giving us some sweet little thoughts as well as we were going along. And for everybody watching, we've always got more stuff coming along through the psychedelic pipe. Thanks for watching and hanging out with us. And thanks again, Simon, for taking the time with us today.
Absolutely, man. Love it.
Oh, I'd love to see you again soon. Okay. Enjoy your weekend, Simon.
Indeed.
There we go. You still there, Simon?
I am indeed. Yeah.